Welcome to The Next Word. I'm your host, Chris Warnke, and tonight we have a very special guest, His Excellency Philip Jada Natana, who is the ambassador from the Republic of South Sudan, the latest country to join the United Nations. And what a pleasure it is to have you, Ambassador.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much.
Yes, wonderful. I'm so happy because we've heard so much about the Republic of South Sudan over certainly the last 10 years, and the struggles that your people
thank you.
have had to endure, and our hearts, many hearts are there with your people, and
thank you.
to help. But we have the great future is, I think, coming for the country, and so I'm so happy you're here. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's also good for me to be here finally.
Yes.
We've spoken about several times, so I'm happy to be here.
Yes, me too. And a lot's happening in the
Yeah.
certainly in the last week, but the last several months, but even just the last week. But let's take it back. You've been here since what? You've been here 6 months?
Yes.
Okay. So it's been a change from your other posts. I know you were
Yeah,
in
I've been
South
here.
Africa.
Yeah, I've been here for about 6 months as the ambassador to the United States, and of course, as we, for us diplomats, every country is different. It's in its own way, So getting to know the people and so on. But I must say that actually, when I arrived here, I felt that that I've been met with a lot of people who are a lot friendlier, and so it was always easy, to get across your points, to have a discussion, to talk to people about whatever subjects it is. So for us as diplomats, if you can get a chance always to be able to talk to someone, that makes your life a lot easier.
Absolutely. Do you travel a lot? Have you traveled at all through the United States in your post, or have you had time?
Yeah,
I
haven't had time to travel quite a lot
Yeah.
here, but I just took some very short trips. For example, this weekend I actually went to Nashville in Tennessee, and I was invited there for a meeting of the Sudanese community and the SPLM. So it was quite an interesting place to go to and to meet different people from different walks of life. Prior to that, about a month ago, I was also in Kentucky, in Louisville.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's also a very interesting trip for me. Finally, to go and see the famous birthplace of the Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC.
the Kentucky. Everybody talks about the Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's great.
Yeah.
That's is there a large Sudanese community in? You said in Nashville. I mean, there's a significant community in Nashville and.
Yeah, I
of
think
these southern
Nashville. Apparently, I mean, I don't have the statistics myself, but it's very interesting wherever you visit here. I've been to Minnesota, for example, and of course, I've just told you about being to Kentucky and been to Tennessee, but I've also been to Nebraska and so on. So it's always very interesting to get to meet people, and they would tell you, oh, this is where we have one of the biggest communities. By the way, they say one of the biggest communities. So
right.
So for reasons of comparison, I wouldn't say whether there are more people in, for example, Tennessee than in Kentucky, but I can say for sure that our biggest number of the South Sudanese community live in Nebraska.
In Nebraska?
Yes.
Why is that? That's interesting.
I think for several reasons, but I think that's part of the Midwest, and I think culturally people find it, I think that's one of the big, maybe not like other states, but it's one of the biggest cattle country, and we come from a cattle keeping country.
So
I think they feel a lot, but they might have their own reasons, but I don't know the mechanisms that the U.S. Used to place people when they resettle in this country.
Interesting.
But I'm sure that one of the choices that they definitely have to make would be to see whether you can be able to get some kind of job where you do so. Right. People who have been close to cattle, and I think that might be one of the reasons.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Because I would have thought Minnesota. I would have thought maybe, I know there's a big Somalian population in Minnesota, but
yeah.
But the country now, the Republic of South Sudan, about 12 million people or so, or 12 million or so. I mean,
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Our population is about 12 million. That's what that's what according to the last population census, it was slightly more than 8 million, but we still need actually to do, because there's been a lot of movement, you know. I mean,
Right.
when we got independence,
Right.
there were people who had moved into the country, but also due to the conflict, there are people who have also moved out of the country. Yeah,
Right.
so now with the signing of the peace agreement, hopefully
Right.
when things settle down and there is less movement, I think then one of the things the government would want to embark on is really to carry out a fresh population census, so they can know not just the accurate number that South Sudan has in terms of population, but actually to see the distribution of the population, where you have more people
Right.
and when you have less people, because that will help in the mapping
Right.
of, for example, providing services to the different areas.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
With the peace agreement and with what happened with last week with Pope Francis, which was fascinating, the deputy president, opposition leader, and the president went to the Vatican.
Yes.
And the Pope not only bowed, he got on his knees and he kissed their feet, which was quite a moment in history that is so significant.
Yeah, I think, you know, South Sudan went through a lot, you know, I mean, in terms of the struggle in order to achieve independence. But then after that, you know, for different reasons, but I always, you know, tend to believe that maybe one of the really strong reasons why we are always in conflict is actually the trauma of the past conflicts. Right. You know, that's what I always say, because unlike other countries who have come out of a history of war, South Sudan, unfortunately, did not follow in the process of coming out with a national plan of reconciliation and forgiveness, you know, because that's really very important. Because now all of a sudden you have people who've been on opposite sides and fighting each other, then you bring them together, you know. So people come with their own historical baggages, you know, and and immediately, I mean, if you just need only a very slight spark to take people back into conflict, and that's what we have been going through, you know. I think many people have asked, you know, why after a very long struggle, South Sudanese went back quickly to war, you know. It is, of course, something very unfortunate, but I think the situation of South Sudan is not unique. I mean, if you look at histories of other countries, even here in the United States, you know, there had been a lot of conflict, even after freedom, you know, the issues of slavery and all of that, you know, it has happened. But of course, we now are living in a modern century whereby information travels very fast, you know, so people hear about that instantly, you know. So South Sudan becomes focus of news for different reasons, humanitarian reasons, of course for political reasons, which are overall, and people tend to hear about that. So everybody's concerned about what is happening in South Sudan, and that includes the Vatican, of course, you know. And I think the gesture that the Pope did last week, you know, kissing the feet of the leaders of South Sudan, the president, and then the vice president, and you know, was something that, according to me, is something that he's actually to try to demonstrate and really feel that, you know, they are concerned and they really want to see that the leadership of South Sudan work together. And I think that is something that has been understood, I hope, by the leadership, and I hope that, you know, with the implementation of the peace process, South Sudan would put behind the bitter history of war and conflict and really move on to the history of peace.
One of the things I was intrigued with, that the majority religion is Christianity.
Yes.
Yes. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, the majority of South Sudanese are Christians, but of course we have a sizable number of Muslims.
Yeah.
But we also have a good number of people who do not, ascribe, if you want, to the heavenly religions. So they call them enemies, but they have their own traditional way of praying, but they don't belong maybe to the three major religions, that's Islam, Christianity, and Judaism.
Right. That's fascinating. A little bit about yourself, though. I mean, you've been in the diplomatic kind of arena for over a decade, correct?
Yes.
So you started, at a very early age. And you went,
right.
and then you went on to, you served in South Africa.
Yes.
Which was a very big post.
That's right.
I'm assuming that was a very, yes.
I actually started my diplomatic career in Eritrea, and that was in 2007.
Right.
That's where I first worked. Even that was prior to independence. South Sudan then, as a result of the 2005 agreement deal between the SPLM then and the government of Sudan, we had an article that granted South Sudan some sort of a leeway to be able to practice foreign policy. So we didn't have an independent Ministry of Foreign Affairs as such, but what we had was a Ministry of Regional Cooperation. So we decided, based on that, from the agreement, to open up liaison offices. So most of the neighboring countries and countries that have been friendlier to us, also like the United States and others, we established offices in them. So we didn't call them embassies, but we called them liaison offices. So they liaise businesses, because what we had then, according to the agreement, was a one country but two systems. So that's where I was appointed to be the principal liaison officer in Eritrea in 2007, some years before independence of South Sudan. So but actually, in actual fact, what we did was we realized we actually practiced diplomacy, although we didn't, we were not recognized, of course, by the Vienna Convention and so on, but we were treated equally as diplomats.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when we come back, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the next South Sudan and what's going to happen in terms of your development phase. And so very exciting times, but we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're watching The Next Word. We'll be right back.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Welcome back. We're having a conversation this evening with His Excellency Philip Jada Natana, who is the ambassador from the Republic of South Sudan. And it's been a very exciting conversation. And South Sudan has a great future, and that's what we're going to hear about now.
Thank you.
I think it does. I mean, I think people are really interested in the country.
Yeah, we are actually very optimistic about the future of South Sudan. And maybe just to take you a little back, we are confident this time that this peace agreement is going to hold.
Good.
And we don't want really South Sudan, just people to focus on South Sudan because of war and conflict and so on. We want people to be exposed to the other parts of South Sudan. And therefore, last week on the 11th, here in D.C., South Sudan had a roadshow here that was done by a PR company called AZ. But they invited, our Minister of Foreign Affairs was here, Minister of Finance, of course. This was done on the sites of the
IMF.
World Bank and IMF spring meetings, so our Minister of Agriculture and our Minister of Mining was here, so they had an opportunity, not just to meet government officials, but also to meet some people from the private sector. And there was a panel discussion in which they shared, what South Sudan has to offer, in terms of of agriculture. The Minister of Agriculture talked about cash crops and different products that can be gotten from South Sudan. The Minister of Mining also talked about the opportunities that you have in mining. You know, I think now people are so much focused on South Sudan being the third largest producer of oil in South, yeah, but we also have other minerals, you know. So he took the opportunity to talk about mining opportunities. Gold was one of the things that was mentioned, yeah, but there are areas also that expect diamond and then uranium, in other parts, in other parts. And the CEO of Nile Pet. Nile Pet is a company that has been formed, but as almost like an armed wing of the government that mainly focus on oil and oil exploration, but they also invest in other things. So he was here to engage with you know, with investors who might be interested in investing, for example, in oil refineries, and so on, or even on the building of infrastructure, because for you to get the oil out, in the, you know, his reasoning was that it's only a portion of the oil that has been discovered in South Sudan, but there are more wells that needs to be dug. The potential for exploration is still there, and with that, we would require, of course, additional infrastructure, because we only have all the pipelines that you transport oil to the market. They all pass through Khartoum, but you have alternatives that you can offer, maybe to construct pipelines to other neighboring countries like Kenya, for example, or Eritrea, because we are a landlocked country.
And totally landlocked.
Yeah, we are a landlocked country, and therefore, if we have to export our oil, we need to look for outlets. So these are some of the things that were discussed. But as you know, the U.S. has been a great friend to South Sudan, you know, in terms of helping the people of South Sudan until the time that we achieve peace. So I think it only makes sense that we really need to engage also with the U.S. Private sector to see if they can invest, and also if they can reap the fruits of benefit of peace and freedom that is already in South Sudan, you know. So that was the conversation that we've had. Here on the 11th, and then on the 12th, there was a further engagement, but this time with the private sector in New York. Yeah, this was also like a day event, and then this group has the ministers. They have traveled now. On the 17th, they are going to have a similar encounter in Dubai. For 2 days, and then they will move to Johannesburg in South Africa on the 23rd.
Oh, that's exciting.
So yeah, so that's just to say that, you know, the government is ready to engage with the private sector to see what they can be able to do in South Sudan after what we have peace now.
Let's go back to the agricultural, your commodity and your exports. You mentioned, you know, agricultural cash crops. What are they? I mean, what are your...
Well, I think in terms of the cash crop, they said there's a lot of potential. One of the potentials for cash crop that we have, of course, is coffee. You know, coffee is one of the things that we can produce. But currently, actually, South Sudan already exports gum arabic. You know, and that is something that is really not well known, because the biggest producer of gum arabic was the Sudan, you know, but I think what many people didn't know was that much of this gum arabic is actually produced in South Sudan.
Really?
You know, yeah, so they call it gum arabic. Actually, now there's a dispute. People are saying, why would it be called gum arabic? It's actually gum Africa, you know, so South Sudan exports gum arabic, but we also have a potential to, you know, to export, which is not yet developed to that extent, cereal, you know, like sorghum and maize, but other cash crops like sesame and
really?
sunflower. seeds, which can be used for oil.
Oil, yes,
So I
that's
think these are some
interesting.
of the things that our Minister of Agriculture was really trying to engage the private sector on and said, look, we have these opportunities,
So
and the
wonderful.
land is vast. I mean, in terms of commercial or mechanized agriculture, there's
Oh,
so
is
much
it?
that there's so
Oh,
much
great.
that you can be able to
Right.
do. The only challenge now would be, of course, it is going to be the first time that people will be cultivating, I mean, on a large scale like that,
Right,
So
right.
really to get the land
exciting,
ready and
right.
everything might need a bit of intensive labor to prepare it. But once you have done and you've done where your first harvest, then it's going to be a lot easier. So the government of South Sudan would want to partner on one hand with people who would, I mean, investors from here who would want to invest in agriculture, but they would also want to attract investors who just want to go the whole private sector. And if they want to take partners from South Sudan whom they want to
great.
invest together with them, that's also an option that is quite open.
That's wonderful. And yet you go back to Nebraska, and you mentioned Nebraska before, but I would think with that opportunity to maybe partner with U.S. agricultural companies, particularly in Nebraska,
Yeah.
or the neighboring states, Iowa and other,
Yeah.
I think there would be a lot of.
I think
a
that's
lot of
something that also, we would be more than willing to consider. It was very interesting 2 weeks ago that the African American Institute organized a retreat for African ambassadors in Wei, which is between Annapolis and Ocean
Yes,
City.
yes.
I don't know whether I got the
Not-
pronunciation
yeah,
right.
yes.
It's
Ah.
W-Y-E.
Yeah, W-Y-E.
Y-E,
Yes, Y.
but
Yeah, yes,
Y.
yes.
Yes, yeah.
It's a
So-
very agricultural.
Yes, yeah.
community.
So we were there, a group of African ambassadors. The invitation was
Really?
extended to everybody, to all the African ambassadors. So we were expecting to be the 54, but of course, some didn't turn up and send
Yes.
their deputy head of missions and so on. So one of the interesting things that we kept hearing again and again was that African ambassadors, if you really want to be effective, you need to get out of DC.
You do,
know?
you do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, you do.
So, and I think that really just what you're pointing now is actually again, asserting to the same statement and testimony. So I think that would be one of the things that personally I will be very interested in, and try to travel to other states, maybe meet the mayor, meet the governor, meet the congressmen and the senators from there, and try to discuss with them and meet actually the private sector and see if you can be able to attract and convince some of these private sectors to come and invest in South Sudan.
It's also the academic.
So Minnesota, Minnesota definitely for agriculture.
Yes.
But we were actually talking about, I met with a representative of Chevron, who came there to attend, and he was saying, look, I think that was before the roadshow, and he said, really, if you want your Minister of Oil to get to convince investors in the oil sector, you don't need to be in Washington. You need to bring him down to Houston.
In Houston. You have to be in Houston. Yes.
So
this is very.
So
yes.
you mentioning about Minnesota here now is additional information that I think I need.
Oh,
to
absolutely.
use.
But there's a little jewel because we're in Maryland. We're here in Maryland. No, there's a little unknown jewel on the Eastern Shore, which is also it's a University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which has a very good agricultural program, very close to where you were when you went to YU. Very close. And these are the kinds of partnerships also that could be potentially very useful,
That's very interesting. Giving me more ideas.
And
now.
this is an historical black college. It's, they've already done some things in West Africa, but certainly.
Thank you.
Their student body, I think would be very interested. So there's a lot of resources, not that far. I guess that's what I'm saying. That
that's right. But I mean that's so that the engagement process will continue, and as I said before, to try to attract. I mean, there are people already who have shown a lot of interest even prior to this roadshow. I mean, there are people from the private sector who lead different companies who have contacted me at the embassy. They are those who are interested in investing in infrastructure. You
Yes.
know, there's
Yes.
looking at feeder roads. Every day there's a new technology coming. You know,
Oh,
so
yes,
you really
which is
don't
exciting.
need, which you don't need to really go back and use old
Oh, the old tech,
technologies.
which is
Yeah,
the exciting thing actually for
Yes.
South Sudan. It's exciting because you're leapfrogging
that's right. Yeah.
into a whole new arena of new technologies that are far
Yeah.
more efficient, far
Yeah.
more,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
easily
So I mean, so
adaptable.
we have people also who are interested in, for example, investing in refineries
Yes.
and the oil sector and
Yes,
so
I
on.
would think you
So
would.
the conversation we are having with them now is that really we are much interested also in that. You know, I mean, whoever wants to come and invest in South Sudan, we would say, you know, let's try to discuss that. And then we see the embassy will, of course, be playing its role. That is really to help to facilitate these investors to be able to, you know, to go to South Sudan. There are already some companies, you know, maybe not very big companies from the United States who are already present in South Sudan. I mean, investors who want to invest in different areas, but we still feel that, you know, the ground still can take more, you
Yes,
know,
yeah.
of those. That's why we want to continue this conversation and really try to convince investors to come to South Sudan.
So it's very exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, you know,
Yeah,
I think it's a whole new
yeah.
arena that's opening up, and
Yeah,
this
and
is
I
going to
think
be
through also conversations like what we are having here, I think that will be also something that, you know, because I think the American public is not really well informed about South Sudan, you know, in terms of
no.
opportunities. But of course, that's our work. You
And
know,
that's
we need to do that quite a lot by engaging, by having, you know, events like the roadshow, by
Yes.
having, you know, interviews like this, so that, you know, you'd be known for, you know, you will be able to tell your own story, because sometimes you take things for granted. You
Right.
know, I mean, you
Absolutely.
feel like when people are talking about your country and you think they know, you know, they know everything about your country, but that may not be the truth. You know, so
Right.
I think there's a need, you know, for us at the local level at the embassies to try to, you know, to update the American public on investment opportunities, on trade opportunities and other things, so that they can also be able to, you know, to invest. Yeah.
Well, Africa is the next frontier. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
place to go to. I
Yeah.
mean, it's great opportunities for investment, and
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
extremely exciting time. Thank you.
Okay.
You've been watching The Next Word. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.